competing in the market. Writing this book has been a source of great joy, affording as it did the challenge of condensing all my leadership philosophies into a single, logical narrative. While I didn't set out to write an autobiography, it was only natural to use personal experiences in describing the challenges authentic leaders face and how they can be dealt with. Throughout the book, I have endeavored to be candid, open, and introspective. The introduction offers a perspective on how the current leadership crisis developed, and the proposition that the solution requires new leadership, not new laws. Part 1 describes the dimensions of authentic leaders, illustrates how leaders develop through transformational experiences, and examines leading an authentic life by balancing work and home life. Part 2 explores how leaders build authentic companies. It presents the central proposition that mission-driven companies create far greater shareholder value over the long term than do financially oriented companies. It shows how values-centered organizations become peak performers, and how companies that empower their employees generate superior customer service. It makes the case that it is great teams, not charismatic CEOs, that build great organizations. The last chapter shows how authentic companies generate superior results for all their stakeholders. Part 3 shows how authentic companies compete in the marketplace, looking first at the 7 pitfalls that break the growth cycle of successful companies. The succeeding chapters explore what companies must do to fulfill their missions, look at ethical dilemmas and how they are resolved, and probe the process leading to breakthrough innovations. The concluding chapters propose that acquisitions should not be primarily about money, but to build organizations and address the challenges of meeting the needs of various stakeholder groups. Part 4 goes beyond the bottom line to look at the crucial differences between governing and managing when it is time for leaders to take their case to the public arena, and how to prepare for succession and move on to new challenges. The epilogue issues a challenge to future leaders to make a meaningful difference in the world. My deepest hope is that these ideas will help inspire a new generation of leaders to lead authentically and build authentic companies. Bill George, May 2003, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Introduction. Where have all the leaders gone? Thank you, Enron and Arthur Andersen. The depth of your misconduct shocked the world and awakened us to the reality that the business world was on the wrong track, worshiping the wrong idols, and headed for self-destruction. Like the proverbial frog that dies when temperatures are gradually increased, but immediately jumps out when tossed into a boiling pot of water, we needed this kind of shock therapy to realize that something is sorely missing in many of our corporations. What's missing? In a word, leadership. Authentic leadership. What began as a few executives charged with violating the law morphed into issues of corporate governance and the failure of our governance systems. As we begin to understand these same issues at a deeper level, we realize that the missing ingredients in corporations are leaders committed to building authentic organizations for the long term. Every generation has corporate thieves who break the law to reward themselves. This time around, the excesses are not limited to a few. I believe deeply that the vast majority of corporate CEOs are honest leaders, dedicated to building their companies. Unfortunately, far too many leaders got caught up by the short-term pressures of the stock market and the opportunities it brought for personal wealth. Under these pressures, and enmeshed in the quest for personal gain, they wound up sacrificing their values and their stakeholders. Our system of capitalism is built on trust. Trust that corporate leaders and boards of directors will be good stewards of their resources, providing investors with a fair return. There can be no doubt that many leaders have violated that trust. As a result, investors lost confidence and withdrew from the market. In the process, many people got hurt, not just the perpetrators. A Time CNN poll taken in the summer of 2002 reported that 71% of those polled feel that the typical CEO is less honest and ethical than the average person. In rating the moral and ethical standards of CEOs of major corporations, 72% rated them fair or poor. A similar survey by the Wall Street Journal Europe reported that only 21% of European investors believe that corporate leaders are honest. In the midst of the current crisis, we must ask ourselves, where have all the leaders gone? Where are today's versions of James Burke of Johnson & Johnson, Walter Wriston of Citicorp, John Whitehead of Goldman Sachs, and David Packard of Hewlett-Packard? These people not only built great enterprises, but were statesmen in the business community and leaders in addressing societal issues as well. In contrast, most leaders of today's best-run corporations remain silent. Are they afraid that by speaking out they may invite scrutiny of their companies? In so doing, they give the impression that they have something to hide or are also part of the problem. Only a few CEOs, such as Henry Paulson of Goldman Sachs and Henry McKinnell of Pfizer, have been willing to condemn these practices publicly. Recognizing the larger issue is one of public trust in the capitalist system. Paulson's acts were doubly courageous, as he risked not only criticism from his peers, but his customers as well. Andy Grove, chairman of Intel, commented recently, "I find myself embarrassed and ashamed to be a businessman." These sentiments were echoed by a rising star at Medtronic, the medical technology company I led for a dozen years. He told me how angry he was at the executives who had damaged the reputations of all business leaders, saying he was reluctant to tell friends that he too is a corporate executive. Capitalism becomes the victim of its own success. How did we get in this situation? Is this a recent phenomenon, or have these activities been going on all along? We are witnessing the excesses of the shareholder revolution that began 15 years ago. In its early stages, pressure from shareholders did much to improve the competitiveness of American corporations, as companies trimmed unnecessary expenses, improved profitability, and increased cash flow. However, the financial rewards from their actions, both corporate and personal, were so great that companies and shareholders alike developed an inordinate focus on short-run results. In a booming stock market, it all seemed to be working. Then, capitalism became the victim of its own success. Instead of traditional measures such as growth, cash flow, and return on investment, the criterion for success became meeting the expectations